But yeah, I mean, like that penicillin shit's why I don't fuck with like blue cheese. Like that's mold too. I'm not accidentally gonna get.
Well,
fucking
I mean, like
syphilis
blue
from-
cheese also smells like the inside of your mouth when you wake up in the morning. So like, yeah, I'm solid. I'm not gonna put that in my body. I brush my teeth and do like the whole tongue scraping thing to make sure that I don't smell that every day. This week's cry for help is I don't know, it's healthcare, but it's probably
healthcare.
it's probably gonna go in many other directions.
I mean, so is healthcare in general.
That's fair. We have someone that is much more knowledgeable on this topic than Jesse and I, because the two of us are actually just fucking idiots. But we have Vasilius, who is currently in med school, planning on working in the healthcare sector of America. So how do you feel about the marketplace? How do you feel about the marketplace of healthcare? How do you feel about the absolutely pristine condition that it currently exists in? You know? Like, we have the best healthcare coverage in the universe.
And the best treatment of all of our healthcare workers.
Honestly, I think like aliens from Mars look at us and they go, wow, that's exactly how we want our healthcare system to be.
Before I go into thoughts, there was a advertisement that I saw recently while watching a show on Hulu, and it was for this like service called like Hims or something like that, where it's like it's in order to for guys to find a doctor that would prescribe them like guy-oriented like healthcare treatment, like ED or like hair loss, or like. And I'm like, while I'm watching, I'm like, so we've become like so like our perception of like healthcare has been so warped as to what it can and should be to, oh, it's so messed up. So instead of like using insurance or whatever, I'm just going to pay this private service to like give me things that a primary care physician should just do for me and check in with me regularly on a yearly basis.
So, yeah, I mean, the other thing is it's probably cheaper to go through a private service than if you were to go to a primary care doctor and be like, yo, I need some dick pills.
Correct.
Yeah.
However, like the dick pills will not enhance your life in terms of like a mortality.
Hold on. I will not have you come onto this program and slander our only sponsor. Okay? Blue Chew, hit us up. I'm defending you right now. I am defending the honor of your corporation.
Against the man.
Come on. What are you saying? Are you saying that like it's wrong of us to go to a private company to acquire dick pills? Sometimes my dick just needs to work.
Or is it like the other way around, where it's like, are you saying that I shouldn't like ask my primary care physician?
And you know what? If the little blue pills are going to be covered by Medicaid in the communist world of any of those dictators that want to take office, I don't want my tax dollars going towards it. This is a really problematic start to the show. Can we please move on from this bit?
No, I'm just saying, why can't I ask my primary care physician to subscribe me to AG1 so that I can protect my gut health? This should be commonplace. Why can't my doctors work with my sponsors in order to give me prescriptions of my sponsors?
And then, kind of piggybacking off of that, I'm glad that to a certain extent, mental health, like the discussion of mental health, is much less taboo now. People are pretty aware of what anxiety and depression are, and it's not just like, oh man, it's just in your head. You're just getting hit with the big sad like everybody else is.
It's a moral failure.
Yeah,
it isn't. But
yeah, but at the same time, I think treatment of mental health has become even more stigmatized now than it has been in the past. I don't know if I'm being a little bit hyperbolic about it, but
I could see it. The argument's definitely there, because everyone that like, you hear the language and the lingo so much nowadays that anyone with a TikTok thinks they can diagnose you.
Yeah, and
so it's taken that much less seriously.
Like, I mean, one of the more like recently commonly like prescribed like medications for like mental health that like just by name just immediately has all this stigma are like antipsychotics essentially, even though that those are usually like quite beneficial for like treatments of mental illness that doesn't really respond well to initial treatments. Like there are some people who have like a depression, like a certain kind of depression where like typical SSRIs or whatever don't work. So then they go towards the like more mild antipsychotics and then they are doing pretty well.
Mm-hmm. But like, couldn't they just go to Ozempic? I feel like that would make them feel better about themselves. Like a lot of them, not all of them.
We should stop just dropping brands. But I think that there are a lot of people that feel as though mental health is now kind of like any other illness where there is a medication that you can use to just kind of make it go away.
So okay.
Because like, you know, there are times where medication is what is needed in order for you to like be able to function like within our fucked up society. Yeah. But you know, sometimes you do just need like a therapist to kind of talk you through some of the issues that you're running into every day of your life. And I feel as though these days a lot less people are going to therapists in person. Yeah. With services like BetterHelp and just like telehealth it's like it just feels as though it's the most like dystopian reality that we're living in, mm-hmm. where everything is kind of just becoming privatized to the point where like even just trying to go find a therapist, it's just now your responsibility to hop on a Zoom call with like, I don't know, some 27-year-old recent graduate that's just like working to get their hours.
Yeah. I mean, I will say like some thoughts that I've had. A lot of this isn't like evidence-based, but just like from my own like understandings is we did used to have much more like opportunities, I think, to like actually like have like communications and like interactions with people that were way more like vulnerable, where like you had enough trust and like good relationship with people around you where like that would be the therapy you would need to like get by essentially. And then medications for mental health like SSRIs and the like help in terms of like the brain chemistry to like be more susceptible to that therapeutic treatment, mm-hmm. if that makes sense. So like your baseline isn't so far down the gutter that like that interpersonal like therapy is not going to help you, but like it elevates you high enough in order for that therapy to actually take effect. It's the whole like dialectical in the way that like if you try to apply a change onto something that has no actual like basis to like turn into something through that change, then it's pointless. Like if someone's brain health is so down the gutter that like someone talking to them will do literally nothing, then there's no point.
Yeah, it's to all the dumb people at home that are getting confused. I will try to simplify this. It's like taking a raw egg and trying to turn it into steak. There's nothing that can make that a reality.
Yeah.
You kind of it's kind of like you need the medication to be able to like even yourself out to a point where then you can take therapy and help yourself. Otherwise, yeah, you're running headfirst into a brick wall and thinking that like you're fucking Naruto. If it hurts,
it's working.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But mainly we wanted to bring you on because of you're one of the only people that are brave enough to call yourself tanky at this point in our group of friends.
Mm-hmm.
And with all of the union or like with all the strikes going on right mm-hmm. now, one of the topics of conversation that has been coming up quite a bit during all of these strikes is just the right to health care for unionized workers and just workers in general. And as someone that is right now, I know you're not in residency, but you're working around a lot of patients, and I'm sure you've had some run-ins with insurance companies of sorts. Mm-hmm. Like, what has your experience been on the back end of things?
Yeah, I mean, so the thing with insurance, like something that's like very unfortunate about it is, especially if there's like a hospital system that's like a for-profit, meaning like there are like it's investor owned essentially, like there are private people that can just invest in a hospital system in order to like make money off of their investment. Like those kinds of hospital systems, they typically like will find ways to charge patients out of network, essentially, because like if you think about how the insurance system works currently, right? The hospital will have like their, in my opinion, inflated cost for everything, right? And then any insurance provider that is in network with that hospital system has like predetermined negotiated costs that are different from what the hospital charges, right? In some ways that's good, like Medicare, for example. The reason why it's not so expensive is because it has so much like power to like really keep costs super low. I don't know of any like insurance that can get the cost of healthcare to be so low as Medicare. And if you think about it a little bit further, it's probably because the government has to pay it rather than like companies or whatever. So it's much more beneficial for the government to actually strong arm cheaper costs for the healthcare that they are actually paying for, right? But all the others, not so much liberty to like negotiate prices or whatnot. So they typically have to resort to like the whole in-network model, where it's like, okay, this hospital, we have this agreement with them, so that's why you as a person on our insurance can actually go there. If, however, there's a doctor there that we haven't been able to negotiate with, they can charge you a ridiculous amount of money. And so the hospital overall gets a cut of the payment and services and whatnot. So if they are able to get the person getting health services at the hospital to pay more money because they have to pay for an out-of-network service, that in turn would eventually go to their investors, no matter how like small of an actual number that actually is. They will try and find ways to maximize that.
Yeah.
And so things like that, and like having those, because that almost sounds like the doctors that work there are still almost independent contractors that have like their own rates, despite
Typically.
what that's how that works.
Yeah, because like for example, like you have to like for like I'm working with some residents now, and they have to like, in order to be able to like prescribe anything, they actually first have to be cleared by Medicare to actually like go through all this training and all this stuff to be able to actually prescribe stuff under Medicare, or Medicaid or whatever the insurance. If they don't, essentially, if they don't have that like pre-established like relationship, they can't prescribe or provide service or whatever without like charging the like not like agreed upon amount, essentially.
And they have to do that because they don't have that like certification.
It's not so much a certification, it's like an agreement almost. So it's like, for example, Medicare doesn't want doctors prescribing XYZ because it's too expensive for Medicare to cover. So they want the doctors to be aware, okay, instead of prescribing this, you have to prescribe that.
Got it.
Instead of like prescribing this kind of outpatient care, you have to prescribe this version, or you can't prescribe it at all, or whatever. Like, because in the end, it's, we're not going to cover that, so you can't prescribe it. If you do prescribe it, the patient will have to find a way to cover it that's outside of our ability.
Yeah, so if this is the thing that they need specifically because of the dosage or whatever it may be, like they haven't responded to other things, and this is kind of like the last alternative. It's outside of what we support because it's too expensive for our budgets. Just stick them with the cost, because we're only going to, like, do they get the entire cost, or do they pay like as much as they would pay on their medicine, and then the patient needs to make up for just the difference, or do they get?
So this is typically how it works. Like the hospital will have a list of, okay, here's the other thing. The electronic medical record, what doctors like type into like their computers for your notes and orders and all that stuff, it's primarily seen as a billing system, not as a healthcare record system.
Primarily. That's fun.
Like it literally, like your notes are written in order to satisfy billing requirements, not because it's what makes sense, not because it's necessarily what's best for the patient. It's to satisfy billing requirements. Like you have to have X amount of like symptoms reviewed and X amount of like parts of the body examined in order to charge the patient's insurance a certain amount. Because if you don't do XYZ, that's seen as a lower service or lower level of service. That's the actual term. And a lower level of service is charged less, essentially.
Doctors really do be out here acting like fucking Uber drivers. This shit's fucked.
Yeah, no, that's
this
crazy.
Shit is super fucked.
So basically, when anything you put into your note, any orders you place or anything like that, all that is codified such that it eventually is tied to a service that has a price. That service is then like tallied and then charged to the insurance company, which also has the same exact like codes for those services and sees, okay, which of those services do we cover? How much of it do we cover? In what way do we cover it? Do we cover alternatives? Do we just not cover it at all? XYZ. And so the insurance company will then send their whoever is using their insurance a what's called an estimate of benefits, which shows, okay, what did the hospital charge us, essentially, and what did we cover? What did we not cover?
Yeah.
And then what we did not cover is labeled on that like piece of paper or stack of papers, depending on how intense the service was, of how much the hospital might charge you. Because anything that this the insurance doesn't cover is now on you.
Yeah.
Right.
And I'm sure that it's also plays into the whole deductible thing where like even if your insurance covers, you know, whatever procedure or medication that you need, but you know, like they can still pass on some of the cost to the individual up to the amount of their deductible for those cover or those services.
Right.
And so stuff like that is why people are always saying, like, more and more as I've noticed in general anyways, but why everyone says as just a general piece of advice whenever you go to the emergency room or primary care or whatever, that whenever you ask for them to do something or like whenever you get anything done, you ask for like the itemized bill so that you can see everything that's on there that they charge you for, so you could fight it or like catch any redundancies or, you know, some crazy like, oh, you know, it was like $20 for a Band-Aid, one of them because you got a shot, not to mention the actual like whatever the booster, whatever the fuck the shot was for. I don't remember any of them going into high school or college or whatever, but that's like a legitimate thing, like to ask for the itemized bill, because that might like catch some of those things, and if you ask or fight about it, you'll get like a lower bill.
Potentially, yeah, because like here's the other thing too, like insurance companies do that automatically,
right?
Essentially, like it typically whatever the hospital built like charges the insurance is much more than what the insurance can like
actually
argue down,
right?
Essentially, like it could be like, but that amount that they charge the insurance is the same amount that they would charge literally anyone, even if a person without insurance. However, the person without insurance probably doesn't have all the like knowledge, or like at this point insurance probably have it down to an algorithm that like literally like sees something and it's like has an automatic reply, no, this was unnecessary, or you're charging me too much for this or whatever. And it's all automated.
Right.
But as an individual, you don't have that power of automation behind you.
Yeah.
So yeah, you're going through each invoice item by item, just making sure that you're not getting absolutely dicked down by, you know, a health problem. But so this is kind of a long shot question that I'm sure you, I don't know if you would even know. I'm sure there are no like there are no laws put into place to make sure that someone that's sitting on the board of one of those private hospitals, that's stopping them from also sitting on the board of like an insurance company.
No,
because it like from what it sounds
that makes
like,
too much sense.
It goes back to the whole idea of like people call it Hollywood accounting, but it really is just accounting. A lot of the times, at least from what you're describing, there's nothing stopping one person from being the CEO of, or like the director of a hospital, and also being the CEO or operating president of like Prudential Insurance or something, and signing deals between themselves and figuring out ways to charge the insurance company more so that the insurance company can claim losses so that they don't have to pay taxes, while also claiming losses on the hospital side for lowering the price and losing out on profits for certain procedures for certain insurance companies.
Yeah.
There's no regulation, I'm sure.
Not that I'm aware of, like, because like if like the amount of like how high the prices have gotten for health services, like the rate at which it's gotten, like I find it like very difficult to believe that that happened just on its own without that level of like cooperation.
Yeah. We as a country, we kind of just need a mulligan with the healthcare system because it's not working, especially now when you are essentially tying healthcare to employment. You're shackling individuals into low-paying jobs just in order for them to be able to go and take care of any health issues that they may have throughout their adult life. And we all kind of look at this and we see it as a problem. But, what do you have to say to the dissenters that are constantly talking about how, like, oh, man, I don't want to, throw money into this system that's going to give, Stacy, 16-year-old Stacy from Wyoming, the ability to go get a birth control pill.
So if we think about, like, the current system and how it's set up, it is way more expensive to all of us, not just, like, the people who need it most, but literally all of us. It's way more expensive how it is now versus how it could be. And that's simply put because of the fact that there are private hospitals, private healthcare systems, private insurances, all of those. Like, if you think about like the amount of money you're spending on healthcare, how much of that money actually goes into your own healthcare versus how much of that money is just going into the pockets of people that aren't actually doing anything realistically when it comes to your health.
What are you talking about? They're checking the algorithm that they made and funded to make sure that like they're not having to pay for anything that you need to live. That's hard work.
So, I mean, I don't actually have the numbers as to like how much cheaper it would be for us as a whole, but I would imagine like anywhere between 50, like the real cost of all this is probably, okay, tangent, sort of. If you think about the healthcare in Cuba, right? The amount of resources that they actually have access to after the embargo that they're with the embargo,
current embargo,
they're under, the amount of healthcare that they're able to provide and actually like export from them, like the doctors that they train and export from there to other countries, it's wild. Like they give like level of care that like I would argue is at least as good as like what it's.
Their success rate is about as good as our country.
Right.
And like you think about their population and you think about like the 60 years of, human rights violation levels of embargo that the U.S. has levied upon them. The fact that they are able to provide a level of service that is comparable to the wealthiest country in human history is impressive.
I would say the median like level of service that Cuba gives their population compared to the median level of service America does, Cuba is better.
Sure. Yeah. Sure.
On the high end, sure, America probably could like provide better healthcare to our like richest patients compared to like Cuba, but how many of us are in that demographic? Only.
Well, I'm currently displaced. I'll be there soon. Yeah, this is all just a huge grift where like the moment that this show takes off and I can finally start to make a shit ton of money, all of these beliefs go out the window. Yeah, okay. I'm just trying to be a billionaire.
I thought you were saying healthcare was a grift. I was like, yes, that is what we're seeing here.
Exactly. It's like the healthcare system, from what I can just see of it, just feels like this huge Ponzi scheme, where I feel as though every single American that is fighting against the idea of Medicare for all that's what they're afraid of.
But well, listen, it's a service, And like last I checked, we pay for goods and services. So like, why should we expect doctors who have to pay for all of this school to provide us with a free service?
I mean, like, that's
a whole nother level that like somehow,
I get the sentiment of the joke.
Yeah.
But that's a later part of the conversation. You can tell that joke again.
Okay.
But what I mean is like the current healthcare system and the way that we pay into insurance with every single one of our paychecks is it's just a Ponzi scheme. In the same way that everybody that fears getting taxed more is doing, where it's like what they don't seem to understand is that the people that I'm being I don't even know where I'm trying to go with this, but it's like the people that are afraid that, you know, if they were to pay into this tax system where every single person has access to healthcare, that they're going to be funding someone's ungodly want of like an abortion pill or birth control or any of those kinds of medications. They're already doing that. But they're doing it at such a much higher amount than would be necessary if you have, you know, the backing of the United States government. Because right now, I don't know the real numbers, but to pay for a prescription of birth control or any really prescription medication probably costs you $300-$400 without health care coverage, without any insurance. That is what you would be paying out of pocket. But if you were to operate with the Medicare system or like a single government subsidized or government owned healthcare program, you can definitely get that price down to, you know, a reasonable amount. And I guess the reason why it's a bit of a Ponzi scheme is like you're paying all of this money into an insurance company. That insurance company is probably taking that money and investing it into a hospital or investing it into other private investments to generate more profit for themselves. And when push comes to shove and you go, hey, I need to get a heart surgery or I need to get surgery to remove gallstones or something. And the insurance company goes, oh, we can't do that for you. Like, we don't have the funds to do that for you. Like, then what the fuck am I doing paying you $200, $300 a month for?
And the like strange part is like for many people, I don't know if it's the majority, but many people, like the only insurance that they have access to or the only affordable insurance, quote unquote, that they have access to is one that has like deductibles or co-pays or stuff like that. That essentially incentivizes you not to actually use your health insurance to actually improve your health and avoid like much more costly comorbidities or health diseases that you will develop later on in your life. For example, having like a $50 copay to see your doctor every year.
Every time, not every year, but yeah go on.
But like I'm like primary care, like you should see them at least every year. But if you have to pay that amount, like every year, you're like, oh,
for
actually,
nothing to be wrong.
Yeah, you're like, gonna skip it. Like you're not gonna like think of it. It's like I don't know how helpful of a comparison this is, but like think of like car insurance, right? If you get into like a fender bender, you're not gonna use your insurance to cover the fender bender because you have to pay the $500 or however much deductible it is. You'll be like, no, I'll just be okay with this dent in my like car. Essentially, you're not going to like pay $500 to fix that. Like it's not like you're using it for a catastrophic purpose,
right?
And the really messed up part is for so long the healthcare system of America has been so prioritized on the health services side of healthcare rather than the more preventative or just overall well-being side of healthcare, which shocking, I don't know how many, the preventative side is way cheaper and in many ways more efficacious than the like more expensive, like almost like reaction to medical disease services side. Services side is way more expensive, way worse outcomes typically compared to preventative. It has a need and a purpose, and we do need it to have a functioning healthcare system overall. But the amount of money that's put in there compared to the amount of money that could be put in preventative healthcare to avoid those costs is just ridiculous. But if you think about it a little harder, like it's much easier to avoid receiving preventative healthcare if you're feeling good than it is to receive health services when you're pretty bad and dying. Yeah, like your life depends on receiving that health service. No one makes a connection your life depends on the preventative because it's not seen as that urgent.
Yeah.
Because it's not there yet. And if it's not there yet, then maybe it'll never be there. So why worry about it?
Exactly.
Yeah, it's super short-sighted. I mean, on the other side, when a service is being run for profit, that's kind of what it always comes down to.
Because it's way easier to exploit someone when they're on death's door than they're fine.
It's because, you think about the preventative care. If you make that easily accessible and you make that affordable, then long-term, your insurance company or your hospital is going to lose a lot of money because people won't need to be there.
Yes.
But, the dopamine that rushes those grubby little CEO hands sitting there in their board meetings and all of that stuff, the moment that they see the big numbers go up when 60 people have had to come through the past month for some form of surgery of a totally preventable illness, they go, yeah, no, our profits are doing great. We're up 56% from last quarter or whatever. And it's even when you are not directly working, you're still being treated as nothing more than a number by these higher ups, and it's fucking gross. It's demonic, man.
Yeah. Something else that really just randomly popped into my mind is if you think about how much more money these CEOs and hospital systems would make if there were no vaccines, it's a ridiculous idea. If you think that the amount of money vaccine companies and pharma companies are making off those vaccines are ridiculous, multiply that by at least a 5+ number, and that's probably how much money the hospital systems would make off of you not receiving that vaccine. Basically, the healthcare costs associated with having COVID versus preventing COVID are so starkly different.
Well, yeah, one's, 2 doses of a shot plus boosters, and the other's fucking ventilators.
Yes.
So, yeah.
And all the healthcare complications following that, the amount of heart failure that comes after COVID and all these things, that's a very costly diagnosis to have. Heart failure, inflammatory heart disease. That is way more expensive than a vaccine shot.
Right.
And so part of me thinks it's okay, how much of the anti-vax is being funded by hospital systems that just want to make more money off of unvaccinated people?
That's what I was about to
no,
bring
that makes sense. And I was about to make a joke about it where I was like, yeah, it's pretty close-minded of you to try to control what I put in and take out of my body, Yeah, that's pretty authoritarian of you. But no, I never really thought about it like that. Because you are right. It's how many obese Americans were put onto fucking ventilators and just didn't make it inside of, those ICU units during the peak of COVID.
That we're still telling the people that were working in those hospitals, nah, this is fake. I'm not, you're all just bullshitting me, and then they die.
Yeah. That's, and you're just thinking about okay, if you have COVID and you're put into an ICU, how many days are you going to be in the ICU? You've got you've got at least 7 days in there before either you die or you're just good enough to be able to walk the fuck out of the hospital. That's at least $30,000 from the insurance companies or out of the pocket of the patient if they're uninsured.
Yeah. Right. I also want to have a disclaimer. I am not a fan of Big Pharma. I'm not.
No, he is. No, he's the biggest. He's a super Pfizer head.
No one pays me anything.
He's constantly reading Pfizer updates. He's like, damn, I can't wait for that new vaccine to drop. I'm going to get it.
Interestingly enough, I had this conversation literally yesterday. We were talking about medications for blood pressure control. And there's this, I don't know if you're familiar with the medications, but there's one called metoprolol, which is a pretty common one, but apparently if you look at research or whatever, it doesn't show as good of an effect of controlling high blood pressure compared to another drug called carvedilol. But then the doctor I was working with was Well, actually, if you look at like data that wasn't published by the like pharma companies, actually metoprolol actually is as efficacious, if not better, for controlling blood pressure compared to carvedilol. But the thing is, carvedilol had such a marketing push behind it that like typically publications don't happen if you prove a negative, essentially. Like if you prove no difference, that's usually not as hot, quote unquote, for publishing and less likely to be
science
accepted.
Journalism is straight up just Twitter posting.
Yeah,
because Twitter posts that are super wholesome, that are like, oh dude, look at what my daughter drew today, I'm so happy about this, will never get as much love as someone being like, I hope you fucking go kill yourself, you fat cunt. Like that's kind of what you're saying.
There is a level to it for sure, and like some journals have it worse than others. But yeah, no, like if you do a study and all it does is prove that there's no difference between two things, no matter how good the scientific rigor was behind the study, no matter how like accurate and all that, and like potentially useful it could be, if you're showing
how much it just helps like the consumers,
right? But if it shows like no difference, it's be like, okay, what's the point of this from the like journal side of things?
Yeah.
So but as many problems as there are with like scientific research in journals and stuff like that, I have gotten to appreciate just how many like physicians I've been working with that are very evidence-based medicine, because there's two ways of providing and practicing medicine. A dogma base, which is like you learned it
favorite kind. Yeah.
You learned it this way in residency. You're just sticking with it no matter who tells you what. You don't care what the research shows. You're going to do it your way because that's what worked for you in the past, and that's what's going to continue working for you in the future.
Dude, that's the only way to live life. What do you mean?
That's straight up just like it's always lupus until it's not.
What?
And then there's the evidence base where it's like, okay, you regularly look up the research, see if there's new studies that happen, what medications are efficacious for what disease, what's being tried, and all this stuff. You look at like mortality benefit. Like that's typically the number one thing that people rely on. Like they look at the mortality number before they look at any other number for like improvement of like a drug or a therapy or XYZ. And then also looking into like, okay, who funded the study or who funded the people doing the study or XYZ. There are people like that. They aren't super common, and like they're typically the exception and not the rule, unfortunately. But thankfully, those physicians do exist, and I've had the privilege of actually getting to work with them. And like, I definitely want that to be like they literally in their note, in order to justify whatever recommendation that they have for the patient, if it's like contrary to what people typically think or dogma or like established practice, they will actually like include what the article like identifying number is in that to like be like, this is my justification to why I'm providing this treatment or why I'm going down this route. And insurance companies will have a much harder time pushing back on that treatment because it's actually backed by the science.
Which that's a healthcare worker that actually like gives a shit about the people and stuff too. That's awesome.
I'd like to think that most people go into healthcare for altruistic reasons. I mean, like we've spent a lot of time on this program kind of just shitting on capital holders and people that chase after money. But you don't go into healthcare going, oh, I'm just going to make the most money as possible. Like, I'm sure that there are individuals that do believe that, and that's why they go into medicine, and they tend to burn out the quickest when they realize that, like, yeah, sure, I'm getting paid hundreds of thousands of dollars a year, but I also hold the life of X amount of individuals every single day in my hand, and if I fuck up, it's their life that's on the line.
Yeah. Like, there is, like, the part of, like, problematic intentions behind pursuing medicine. Like, it can't be just for money, because there are other, professions they can do that are way more profitable with much less work. So if it's, like, profit combined with, like, the prestige of being a doctor, that could, like, offset the fact that you're not making as much money as easily, but, like, you have this status that comes with being a doctor, so like that offsets it. So if you have that combo, then you can be very a very problematic physician. And then the third pillar of like problematic reasons people go into medicine are like the more like nepotism-esque, where like my dad was a doctor, or like my family is full of doctors or whatnot. So it's like, obviously I'm going to go in this path because it's like so easy for me, because like it's been paved by all these people before me in a way. In reality, not really. Like, sure, they might be a little bit more medically literate than someone who comes from a family of 0 doctors, but there's no reason why the person that comes from a family of 0 doctors would be any less of a physician than that person.
I think the PSA that Vasilios is trying to put out here is that, like, if you're like that, just go be a dentist. You can still make people call you doctor.
True.
Mm.
Yeah.
True. Also, I think we're getting a bit close to the end here, but I think it would be remiss of us to not talk about like the actual hospital workers and like their treatment from like their higher ups, dealing with certain patients and whatnot, and everything that goes a bit more in line with the strikes and stuff happening, like the strikes that happened in was it
it's like
Europe,
mid last
or was
year?
it just specifically England?
I mean,
like
we
all
had
the student nurses.
We
and stuff.
had nurses go on strike in New York over here.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. And it's the craziest thing about all of this, and it always kind of comes back to the profit motive, is these hospitals that were being struck, they would go out of their way to hire scab nurses.
Mm-hmm.
And those scab nurses would get paid something ridiculous like $4,000 a week. And that is so much more money that the hospitals were paying those traveling nurses as compared to what the nurses that work there on a daily basis.
So the traveling nurses in general were scabs?
Yes.
Or okay.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's what I thought. But
yeah,
the way
absolutely.
you phrased it, I thought you were
Yeah.
saying like, oh
It
no,
seemed
they
a
made
little
more than
unclear,
traveling
but
nurses.
yeah.
I was like,
No,
there were
same.
two different groups?
No, the
Okay.
traveling nurses were getting paid $4,000, something like that.
Yeah.
Where like the sum of money that they were getting paid was insane. And what the nurses that were working at those hospitals on a daily basis were asking, it was like a fraction of what they were what the board of directors at those hospitals were willing to pay for the scabs. And it's so sickening to think about, when it's like just the emotional weight of having to be a healthcare worker, not even just, not even just like the physical stress that you have to put your body through when you're working night shifts, but these are the first group of people that have to interact with a patient when they are close to death. Sometimes they are there when the patient passes away. And
they have to tell the family members about
they
it.
are the ones that have to inform families of any deaths that are there, or sit
or
down
just
with a family.
diagnoses.
Yeah. Like all they're trying to do is get a couple more dollars an hour, man. And like you're so afraid of having to pay that long term that you're willing to overpay for one single nurse to come to your facility just to fuck everything up for everybody else. That's I don't know, man.
So oftentimes, like with the nurse strikes, which it still bothers me that it's more so nurse than doctor, but I'll explain why it kind of makes sense. So a lot of the time, nurses are the ones that actually spend the most time with the patients, like
Right.
way more than doctors, way more than anyone else in the hospital, because they're literally by the patient's or very close to the patient's bedside. Whereas the doctor, they realistically only need to spend no more than half an hour with a patient, if they're in the hospital a day,
Right.
essentially, if that. Whereas nurses,
and even then, they're just telling the patients if they had a clean car and everything like that, because they're apparently just fucking. The patients are the Lyft drivers, and the fucking doctors are just going down the list and rating them and comparing them to the fucking list of God, that's so fucked.
But so, yeah, the doctor will briefly talk, whereas the nurse will give them medications, will check in on their pain.
We'll have to clean up my grandpa's shit off the side of the floor.
Yeah. And they get to know the patients in a more personal way, whereas physicians get to know them more so on a strictly medical based. And the amount of personal amount of things you learn from the patient is usually related to their
situation.
Their situation. For example, if you're worried about someone who has limitation in mobility, where will they go after they leave the hospital? Do they have a home to go to? Do they have someone at the home that can help them? If there's cognitive issues, will they have someone who can help them like actually take their medications and all that? There's like an actual like direct reason why they ask these like more personal questions. It's not simply to like know that person like outside of a medical lens. But so nurses typically on their strikes, it's not just a money issue, like not to like belittle the money issue, but it's also like patient like care issues, essentially. Like they're not being like properly resourced, or there's issues with like food or sanitation or staffing, especially. It's like there are so many issues where like staffing is like big reason why there's high mortality in hospitals, just because the staffing is just bad. Like all these factors where like you can't as a nurse in good conscience be like, oh, this is fine, and you have to strike.
Yeah.
And you attach some like pay increase behind the strike, but that's usually not the breaking point for many of these nurses. The breaking point is the level of quality of care that these patients are receiving because the administrators are cutting corners at every step.
Yeah. It's like in a perfect world where everything functions the way that it should be like a 1-to-1 or 1-to-2 ratio for like nurse to patient.
Potentially. Like, it depends, like different like levels of care. Like ICU is usually 1-to-1 or 1-to-2, whereas like general floor, it's like 1-to-5 or something like that. And like,
but it you know, like in a perfect world, in every step of the way, that should be,
it should
like,
be more.
That should be what it is. But like in the system that we currently work in, obviously that's not feasible. However, some of these hospitals are forcing these nurses. It's something, I don't remember the exact numbers, but it was something close to like 1-to-10 was what every single nurse was responsible for. And it's like, how are you how can you expect one single person to be able to give the best care possible to 10 different people during one shift, with each patient needing different things? When that's obviously one of the breaking points, because when you go into healthcare and you're wanting to be there to help people, and you understand that like just because of the greed of corporations and the greed of capital holders and investors inside of your hospital, you are literally incapable of doing that. You're incapable of doing the one thing that you signed up to do. But you were saying something about doctors not going on strike.
Yeah, so like I guess the other part, so nurses see the like level of care patients receive, whereas doctors spend more time interfacing with the medical record because they are the primary people who do the billing side of things. The nurses just follow the doctor's orders through the system essentially. So they don't spend as much time seeing just how bad things are, I guess. And on top of that, they are constantly interfacing with their supervisors, and their supervisors are in constant communication with the board or administrators or stuff like that. So the amount of like whereas nurses, like, sure, they have to work with their supervisors, but it is not as entrenched as it is with physicians, I would say. And again, not a lot of like evidence behind what I'm saying. It's just more so what I've noticed. Where doctors have like almost become numb, essentially. Like one of the biggest transitions from like a medical student to like a resident, other than just the learning the medicine and practicing and all that, is just becoming numb to the current system we have, essentially. Recognizing it's way more limiting than anyone really wants it to be, but we don't have another system. There's no way to obtain a new system, or like we're made to believe there's no way to obtain a different system. And so we just try to do the best we can with what we got. They don't like, and the other thing is like the constant like thought that, oh, if we strike, that's actually harmful to our patients. Like it's still the very short-sighted view. It's like, if I don't provide the care, these patients will literally die. And they're like, why would I do that?
And I'm sure with them too, like if the nurses are dealing anywhere from a ratio of like 1-to-1, 1-to-2 to like 1-to-10, I'm sure with the doctors themselves, it's 1 to like
It's
30?
usually no. So it's usually a little bit more than nurses, but not much more. And it makes way more sense because like a doctor, like most of their work is like charting and like making sure like orders are done and evaluating, and it's not nearly as much like patient
like one-on-one, like building any sort of rapport between them.
There's not as much like patient interfacing compared to nurses, essentially.
Right.
The actual like in-person like hands-on work that they do is not nearly as much as nurses. There's a lot more like heads, and like the risks and everything are on your shoulders. Like you have more responsibility than a nurse does. Like,
right.
You have to, and you're way more susceptible to like med legal and stuff like that from like getting sued. And so like there's way more stress for sure. But like the amount of work is not that much more than a nurse's in terms of like actual work.
Right. Because from what I've seen just over the years in like the ER and other spots, it seems more like, because you only see the doctor for a couple minutes at a time because he's got to like check in on everyone. And it seems to be like their role is, at least the role that you like see them do the most as like a patient is almost just like reviewing and double checking everything that was like written down or recorded by the nurses, making sure that like there's no conflicting medication with other medications or things like that. It seems to be more double checking on like that sort of level, like when they're in the room, that's almost sort of what they seem to be doing most of, and not so much any like there's no rapport building or any of that stuff. Much more about the
and to like
drugs.
Better answer your ratio question real quick, it also depends on like the level of care the patient needs.
Right.
Like ICU, there are way more nurses than doctors. Whereas like if you think of like a more like calm situation like general floors or something, there are more doctors than there are nurses.
Okay.
So it depends on like how much care the actual patient needs to receive.
Right.
I should also just reiterate, I was just throwing out a random number. Like none of those numbers mean anything. They're not real.
They're just for like the use of like making a like relative.
No, I was just creating a stock market.
Which also isn't real.
No, it's totally real. Kind of like the 1-to-10 ratio that I came up with. But kind of just to touch on one thing before we hop off the show, it was, whenever they cover any strikes that involve healthcare workers, it's always like, oh, these selfish individuals not caring about the patients. It's like, again, much like what we were talking about on the last episode, you're not getting angry at the right people. You're literally getting angry at the people that are doing everything they can to make sure that you as an individual are safe when you are, using this broken system.
Yeah. You're mad at the people literally cleaning up shit and like wiping asses all day.
Yeah. Like changing out catheters and shit.
Yeah.
It's insane that you are getting mad at them for wanting, not only for money for their own sake of like, they're not being compensated correctly for the amount of work and the amount of stress that they have to undergo, but they're fighting for your benefit. They're fighting so that you can be provided with a better service. And it's like, dude, just stop acting like you're in a fucking Wendy's parking lot. All right. Just be normal. Just be fucking normal. Okay. That's all. That's I guess that's the takeaway from this. Be normal. Stop acting like you're in a Wendy's parking lot. And also, as Vasilio said, all doctors are actually just a part of the PMC. They are, they're just number pushers. They're all just a bunch of dudes doing admin work. They're not actually, that's all they're doing.
Yeah.
That is exactly what he said.
Words taken straight from the horse's mouth.
He said nothing else. The entire time he's like, yeah, I sit there and I push numbers.
Obviously, there are more community-oriented physicians out there who will either
cannot convince me otherwise.
Volunteer their time or like work in healthcare systems that take patients regardless of insurance or whatever.
God bless those people.
All doctors are just in it for the money. That is the takeaway.
But yeah, it's a mixed bag, and it's really unfortunate how much this profession has been affected so negatively by this capitalist system. And in my opinion, it's no wonder that a lot of people that are more revolutionary against the system do come from a medical background, essentially, because usually people go into a medical background because they care about people, and then when they see that the system, the capitalist system that currently is in place is like actually hurting them all, they're like, no, this is, I can't do my job actually in this system, like, and they will go more down a revolutionary path.
Yeah, so they're definitely the ones that end up being a lot more militant about it too, because you see just the amount of people that get hurt because of the lack of the lack of care that exists inside of the system. Shout outs to Jay.
Yep, Jay, good guy.
But yeah, like last week, please check in the description box all of the links to support all of the ongoing strikes and strike efforts. All that information is going to be down there. Any last things to add?
See your doctor once a year, if you can. It's worth it. Like, especially if it's one that you trust and you feel like is there for you. The amount of like preventative stuff that they could do for you is way better than like finding out, oh no, I have diabetes, and it's way too late to like prevent it. So you definitely don't want diabetes. You definitely don't want high blood pressure. They are two of the worst diseases to have long term, and it affects your quality of life and your survivability significantly. So get your stuff checked.
And when you hear what it is, do it. Don't just be like, hey, I got the checklist. Look at the checklist. It's a list. I got the list. That's it, right?
Yeah. Be active with your health. And with that being said,
get me out.
No, shout out to Dove Cameron.
Oh, true. Yeah, can't leave without that.
Yep.
Get me out.